So thank you very much for inviting me here after I kind of mentioned that Canada was missing on the North American Mycota project. So here I am representing Canada more or less. So just to give you some background for those of you not familiar with what I'm doing, I work for the Canadian government in our new science and technology branch, which is 2 weeks old. I've merged several branches. Canadian government is undergoing revision and changing various reporting structures, but I've been there for 35 years. And this is the William Saunders building where we house the National Mycological Herbarium. Canada under the acronym DAOM, which is an old acronym. And it holds about 350,000 specimens thereabouts. We're not certain, we're still databasing them, all the way from slime molds to polypores and a lot of historical information there. We've been chipping away using old-time databases, DBase 3, among other things, or DBase 4, trying to input the data in the herbarium using whatever money or funds we have. Sometimes we have volunteers, sometimes we have students, sometimes we have a little bit of money from this government pot and a little bit from that government pot. So just some numbers. Just recently we went through the boletes in the broad sense, which the Gomphidiaceae and Strobilomycetaceae are kind of in there with the Boletales. These are broad categories in our herbarium. They're not phylogenetic, they're not even traditional classification, they're just kind of convenient groupings. We have inoperculate discomycetes and perculate discomycetes as categories. And we had some money to put the polypores in, so we started putting polypores in. So a year ago, in the database, we had 1,481 in, and the young woman at the far end there is inputting data, so now we're up to 9,000 some, and she's still chipping away at it, and we project it's going to go on for another year or two because there are lots of polypore data in the herbarium. Now, in our other building where I work on the Central Experimental Farm in Ottawa, we have the entomology collection, 16 million of them, and then we have the culture collection for the fungi. We have about 16,000 cultures in there in all sorts of different storage forms, liquid nitrogen, freeze-dried, under oil. Again, because I work for the Department of Agriculture, at times I've had liberties to cross the country and collect mushrooms here and there, and then the regimes change and then things get more restricted. So it's hard for me to actually work on mushrooms in the wild or in the forest sometimes during some phases. But we have funds to do other things, so what I've been able to do now is we're mining our culture collection, which we have had for decades. And so through the back door I'm studying mushrooms, but from the mycelial stage, and we're doing sequences on them. So we have about 800 sequences as well, or culture sequence, both the long subunit and then ITS for it, but I haven't published or analyzed much of that yet. So that's working at them from the other end. Stopped about 15 years ago or more. I started databasing. I've mentioned this to Ron Peterson and several other people that I had this database on the go I got tired of looking through the literature for records. People get inspired if they know it's a new record for something, and I got tired of looking through Alexander Smith's publications because the reprints were about so tall and there were several books and Hessler's and what have you. So I started inputting these data into a database. So I went through and there's something like 47,000 records. I went through all the literature and tried to get all the Canadian mushrooms, and then I expanded into the US. And I just went down to the state level, but it's basically it's an index. It's like an index at the back of a monograph. It's an index to literature, and you find the page and the reference where that report was. And I recorded the synonyms and what have you. So I have this huge simplified database, but it's very handy for looking up old records, including North American flora, which we input. So, again, representing Canada in a broad sense, what potential contributions? There's lots of amateur clubs that have been around for a long time in Canada. One of them groups we have in the Ottawa Valley, the Miquelot Amateur de la Outaouais, and Jean Berube can correct my pronunciation on that later, helped organize forays for groups in Quebec and locally. And of course, they have the display tables. It was a very poor year that year. It was a drought, so that's why there's not many. And then there's this other club in Montreal, which has a, pardon me, a fungarium. And Yves Lamoureux was one of the few paid mycologists I know for working for a club. And he was part-time. I think he's still contributing. But they have a website, and they had over 4,000 specimens representing 1,900 species, and they're databased in their specimens for all of these in Montreal. And that group has been very progressive. They publish books, they publish CDs. So if you can read French, or if you just want to access information from that area of North America, this club site, and this club is one that you don't want to miss. Now, there's another project, and Jean Berube back here has been involved with, and you can see him at one of the forays there with Tony Atkinson from New Zealand. So Jean sent me these. He started a project where they were sampling the mushrooms, the fungi at these forays, and he would take them back, and he would voucher them, and he would also sequence them. So, as you say, it started in August 2009. They got fresh samples, they sampled them, and they photographs, and they vouchered them. So here's some statistics that he supplied for this group in Quebec. And you can read them as well as I can there to give you an idea of this sort of contribution towards a North American mycota. So I think it's fairly impressive that this is taking place, and it's kind of taking place below the radar, both, I think, within the government and within the groups in North America. And you should be aware of this project that's going on. And Jean, will this be published in some way in the future?
Yes.
The answer is yes. We.
Why is that 65% that's much higher than Arizona? Sorry, what's the question? Why is that 65% matched blast gen bank so much higher? Because it's restricted to macrofungi. Oh, okay.
Yes, that would be a good. Oh, it's restricted to macrofungi rather than all the fungi. Am I going in the right direction here? Or is that, no, I'm going the wrong direction. All right, so these, again, information was supplied by Jean at the back there. So he was kind of estimating how much it was costing for the samples that he was involved with. So, not just the clubs in Quebec, we have active groups across the country. One very, very active group is organized by one person, Anders Voigt, like holding a bottle of Screech there, a Newfoundland beverage, who has started these forays in Newfoundland, and I know the Lorelei Norval and perhaps several others here have gone to these things, where he's producing his own booklets, just self-publishing, or with a park out there. Fantastic pictures. He doesn't do any microscopy himself. He farms this all out, but there's now publications out there based on stuff in Newfoundland, which is quite interesting. Sorry, going the wrong way. In Alberta, there are clubs across the country. But in Alberta, there was the Alberta Mycological Association. It was started by Lenny Shelquick, the late Lenny Shelquick, who published a book of watercolors. Now there's forays organized, and there's vouchering taking place at the last meeting there. And she did, and it's a very active group. And again, a very large province, lots of geographic sites to cover for one group, and really they were in the wilderness. There was nobody knew anything about the fungi or mushrooms from Alberta at the time Lenny started. We're moving further west. There's more clubs. I mean, there's the South Vancouver Island Mycological Club, which is SWIM. There's the Vancouver Mycological Society, which has a nice website, little graphics on it. There's Paul Kruger. He almost looks like a little gnome. And so he posed next to an agaricus, I think it was Augustus, who is an astute observer of mushrooms. I mean, when I started my career 35 years ago, I discovered, that certain mushrooms were illegal to possess. The magic mushrooms, the Canadian government had just started listing them just a few years before I was employed, and I discovered I was picking mushrooms illegally. And shortly thereafter, Paul Kruger sent me a few mushrooms from the west, and there were psilocybes, and I promptly identified them. Actually, I confirmed his identifications because he was sending me species I hadn't seen before, and then I told him he couldn't possess them anymore, so I couldn't send them back to him. So he'd send me different species of psilocybe, which I hadn't seen before, and I told him I couldn't send those back either. So anyhow, he's a very amazing mycologist. And then also out in the University of British Columbia, Mary Burbey, on the molecular front, has got her students sampling and then sequencing, and they have a database which is again available. And the University of British Columbia herbarium is also available online, so all the mushrooms are there. So just to point out things, when I point out that, as the sole representative of Canada perhaps here, it's nice to hear that there's all this funds and this enthusiasm. Of course, on this projection, Canada looks even bigger than it is, but according to the CIA, we're a little bit bigger than the US. Mexico's a little smaller, and again, I don't know if there's any representatives from Mexico here. But it's the inverse. So when you turn around and you look at the vascular plant numbers, and of course, then if we do the David Hawksworth multiplication on well, things just go in reverse. There are far more species of vascular plants in Mexico, and so there should be a lot more fungi, a lot more mushrooms down there. But we have a huge geographic area to cover. So I was comparing that to the logo for the Mike and Lore. But that's perhaps where the funding is. But my other point is that it's a huge area. There was some question asked on one of the websites to do with the North American Mycoflora project, where are the gaps? It's very easy to point out gaps. There's areas where there haven't many humans haven't even gone to, let alone look for fungi. But the number of species is down, but the gaps are huge. And so if you really, really wanted to fill things in, you may complain about, in the Smokies National Park, there's areas you haven't gone to. Can you imagine trying to cover all of Canada? I estimated when I started working that I could go out on a 3-week field trip every year. They would allow me to do this, and I could go to one place, one dot, and it would take forever to cover all of Canada. So they stopped funding that. Oops. Anyhow, please think of us in Canada as being the large subunit working towards molecular, where everyone's happy to hold a puffball and sometimes consume it. Thank you.